Hello and welcome to Hop Along Studio. In today's video, I want to share with you how you can do a mixed media art journaling page using Collage. Collage can add a lot of depth and variety to your backgrounds, so I want to show you a practical example on how to use this technique in your art journal. So let's get started. The first step for this project is deciding on the paper that you want to use for the background. I have a lot of this different Wall Whisper design paper. I have some of this Pam Bray paper that has all these Christmas designs. I have the Bows and Baubles set that have the more black and white. And I'm going to try to mix these together in a kind of an interesting way. And so you wanted to start by ripping your paper. So every time you rip your paper, you're going to get one of two lines. You either get a white line or a line that's just basically torn without any white behind it. And so it really depends on what you're trying to do. If you have ones like this and you don't like it, just rip the other way. And then that way you can kind of adjust it so that you don't end up with the white lines. If you want those really strong white lines, leave them in. Again, it's a personal preference for how you would like your paper to look like on your project. So it's just something to be aware of as you're working, just so that you're not disappointed if you get a rip that goes in one particular direction. And I love all of these pine cones and these other shapes. And paper ripping sometimes takes a little bit of time, because you can see here I actually don't have a very good line there. But if I tear down this way, then I start showing the white. So I want to start at the bottom, and I'm actually going to tear the other way. I find that it works a little bit better when I'm tearing top to bottom. And sometimes I feel like the direction of the paper does matter. Some papers tear better in one direction than another. And so I'm just going to continue to tear all these papers and then basically get them ready to add to my layout. And other areas, you could really do a whole collage with just really straight papers, but I like tearing them. I like seeing kind of what looks I can get, and just to give them a little bit more interest. And you can use either side of your paper as well. But the straight edges are kind of nice if you just want to butt them up against an edge like that. So once you have all of your papers torn up and you have an idea of how you want to arrange them, the next thing you want to do is add some of the soft gel semi-gloss gel to your project to glue everything down. The gel mediums come in a lot of different thicknesses. You can get soft, regular, heavy, extra heavy gels. And usually the idea is that the heavier the gel, the heavier the paper. So I use extra heavy for adding metal and much heavier cardstock to things. For when it comes to pattern paper, the soft gel should do the job. So what you want to do is start by trying to remember where most of your pieces are going to go. And then just basically add some to your surface and add some to the back of your paper. Place it on top. And then add some gel on top as well. So you want to make sure that you don't have a lot of bubbles in here. You want to make sure that you have a good layer. And then I also like using my finger and just smoothing it down, making sure there's no little bubbles or anything else that are getting in the way. And you need to think about where you want, what you want on top and what you want on the bottom. I've just realized that I put that piece down first, and there were some other pieces that I actually wanted them to go under them. But because this is still wet, I'm just going to lift that corner and put that in place. If you need to add a little bit more gel underneath there to get it to stick. And so I'm just going to continue to just add all of these pieces of paper until I've covered my entire page. So our collage is mostly dry here, and it's really nice, but it's very, very bold. And so the next thing we want to do is start trying to mute this a little bit. So sometimes I like using white paint for this, but in this case I want to try to add some more texture. So what I have is the Tim Holtz Ideology tissue wrap. I have some of the Composer as well as some of the white tissue wrap. I had this stuff for a long time, so I'm not too sure if Tim Holtz still carries it. But what I've done is basically scrunched it up because I want to try to get as many lines in there as possible. And I want to try to add it on with, again, some more of my soft gel semi-gloss. So we want it semi-flat, but we do want some ridges in places, so I'm just adding another layer on top. And just squishing this down. This is thicker than some of the other paper that I use. This is more like a wax paper over what I would call like a plain tissue paper. And you want to leave it with some wrinkles in there. So our next layer will want those wrinkles there on purpose. Just get your fingers in there really well and just help it get adhered properly. And most tissue paper that I use, I end up mostly using matte medium for it because it's quite thin, but this stuff is quite thick and is a little bit more waxy, so I'm going to have to use a little bit more force and a little thicker medium just to get it to stay down. And so you can still see it through. It's just not quite as bold as it was before. And I'm going to continue just adding more of this until I cover the entire surface. So now that we've let this dry, we now have the layer of paper, and we also have the layer of tissue paper on top of it. And you can see it's already muted it a little bit. But now that we've added all those crinkly and fun little spots on here, I want to bring out the color a bit by adding a few washes. And so I'm going to mute this a little bit with a little bit of brown and a little bit of green. So I'm using a little bit of this phthalo green blue shade from Golden. This is a high flow paint, so it's highly pigmented, so I don't have to use a lot of it. But it works especially well for washes. And I'm also using a little bit of quinacridone nickel azo gold for this. I like the warmth of that. I might also throw in some burnt sienna depending on kind of how I feel. So you just want to add quite a bit of water to that paint. You can see the nickel azo gold gets that really fun color. And when you start adding it to the surface, just a very light wash with water. It starts brightening up things a little bit and just kind of mutes that white on the page. So the intent with this is not to go too crazy with adding a ton of color, but just to try to help everything feel like it's part of the same project. Collage and decoupage is really fun to do, but then what you need to do is try to figure out how you're going to blend it in. Sometimes you don't want to blend it in. Sometimes you want it to be very distinct. I like using collage underneath a lot of my projects as a layer underneath paint, because then little bits of it peeks through and you get some really fun and interesting color there. So you can see that's warmed it up, added a little bit of a fun color to that. And before I add in the green, I'm just going to let this dry. And now I'm going to go in with my green and see if I'm not sure how much green I want to add to this. I've used this one as a very light wash to give a patinaed effect on some projects before. So we'll see if this works or if it ends up being too much. This is one where you may want to add a little bit and just wipe off most of it and just have little tiny areas where it really shines through. Maybe some of the areas that are a little bit more green that you would like to keep that green color. You don't have to always do it as a really strong wash. You can add little bits, let it catch the corners of things, and then wipe off most of the excess. And I actually think I want to finish with a tiny bit of burnt sienna as well. That's a nice warm brown. Thought I would just add that a little bit along the edges. Just try to tie it in a bit better. I think that's adding a bit of the layers that I'm looking for. So the next thing we want to do is figure out how we want to do our final layers on this background, and sometimes it's best to look at your focal images. So I'm going to be adding this fun focal image from the Wild Whisper Designs Bows and Baubles collection, and also these little presents that I did cut out as well. And so I'm going to make these a little bit more vintagey because right now they're quite white and they stick out quite a bit from what I already have going on. And even though this is a little bit more traditional distressed look, I kind of like the more modern look of this tree and these presents. And I was trying to bring in an idea of kind of the simple Christmas, of my thoughts around Christmas. And so before I move on to coloring and adding these to my layout, what I want to do is maybe add a few more subtle layers. I have the Starry Night stencil from Wild Whisper, and I have this Interference Gold Fine Paint. What Interference Gold Paint does is it's actually color flipping. So it doesn't look the same in all the light. What you do is you add it, and then as it dries, and as you start seeing it in on your project, it kind of gets a different look and feel. So this is a way of adding some subtle texture and color to the background without going completely crazy with a really solid color. And we're not doing the whole stencil, we're just doing areas of it. And I'm not sure if you see that as I move it, the color changes and flips. And you'll notice that you can't see what the design is super clearly, and that's kind of on purpose. And so the darker areas, you'll be able to see it more. In the lighter areas, it might just look more like gold accents. I don't use these interference paints a ton, but I really do enjoy using them because they definitely give a different look, and these are awesome to use on black. I want to add another layer onto this. I'm using the Distress Oxide Fired Brick and the Ledger Inscript stamp from Wild Whisper, and I just took it off the stamp pad because this is not going to stamp super well because we have such an uneven surface. So I'm just going to throw it on in spots and just add that little bit of texture. And I'm sticking to the areas that are a little bit more lighter because that's where you're really going to see it. And again, you don't have to add only the first value. You can add a few others on there as well. But I think that just adds a little bit more fun texture, a little bit more design to this. So now we're going to focus on our focal images. And because these are quite white and the background that we've made has now been fairly muted and is a little bit more on the yellow side, I'm going to add antique linen to all of my pieces here so that all my focal images have a little bit more of a softer feel to them and stick out a little bit less. And it's more just along the edges. So I will be also adding some more color into this. But this is a way of taking those more white images, and once you've started altering things and they no longer match, this is a very simple way. Just adding a little bit of color and just muting everything just a little bit so it matches. Because if you put this straight against as white, straight against that more muted background, it really sticks out, and not in a pleasant way, and a little bit of it kind of clashes with the feel that you're going for. Again, it doesn't have to be super dark, it just has to be enough to mute it and help it look like it's part of the rest of the project. I'm just going to do this to the rest of the pieces, and then we'll move on to the next step. So now that we've added our antique linen ink to these, now I'm going to start adding some watercolor. And if you've been following me for any period of time, you'll know how much I love adding watercolor to my projects. So with this one, I want to go for more muted tones. So I'm going to start with a little bit of alizarin crimson hue. Has that more muted red color. I'm just going to add it into some of the baubles here. So I don't know if these are supposed to be green or if they're supposed to represent ornaments, but I'm assuming they're going to represent ornaments. As far as I'm concerned, this is an abstract tree, so it is open to interpretation. And because I did add in antique linen, I'm having to go a little bit deeper with my watercolor paint, so I'm not thinning it out as much as I usually do. I usually do my water over here and I slowly add in color, but in this case I'm picking up a little bit more straight from the wet watercolor paint just so that I get the intensity of color that I want. And for the yellow, I'm using a cad yellow hue here. I have this brighter lemon yellow right here, but I'm actually going to go for a little bit deeper. I might even go for the new Gamboge, which is more of that warm sunset color. But I think I'll stick with the Cad Yellow for now. It adds that brightness, but without being too stark. And I try to use my watercolors whenever possible, whether or not that's straight watercolor painting or it's little projects like this. Every hour of brush practice is brush practice, and I really like to focus on trying to make sure that I try to use my brushes as much as I can, because that's how I get good with these mediums. I found that sometimes people say, "Oh, I really suck at using a brush," and I did for a very long time. I found using brushes very, very hard, and then the more I used them and the more practice I got, the easier it got. And so what I've realized, if it is painting images for your stamps or it's doing full watercolor paintings, it almost doesn't matter. Find a way to incorporate them into your practice. The easier it becomes, the more you'll use them. So I'm going to add a little bit of cerulean blue plus a little bit of this Prussian blue. I'm going to try to add those together and see kind of what I get. It's maybe a bit deeper than I really want for this layout, but I will just run with it. Add a few in here and there. I feel like this could use some green. And because I've already been using green in other areas, I'd start with a Viridian hue, but I'm actually moving to this Hooker's green. Again, a little bit more muted color. It suits where we're going with this a little bit better. And projects like this make it nice and easy because they're little circles. So all you have to do is practice going in a circle. And so if you're feeling intimidated, start with projects like this. Ones that aren't super detailed, but are more just filling in color in areas. As I've gotten better with watercolors, I've started using a larger brush. But if you're new to this, start with a small brush and then work your way up to using a larger and larger brush. I'm going to use a slightly different hue of blue. I'm going to add a little bit of turquoise to this. It's a little bit brighter, but I still feel like it fits. I'm applying this a little bit more thickly than I usually do. So I usually thin out my watercolor paint a lot more before I add it. But in this case, being a focal image, I kind of want the intensity of color. You can see that with this one, it almost didn't water down at all. So even though this color and this color are the same turquoise color, this is the cool thing about watercolors, is you can get a whole range of color. And for a star, I'm going to be a little bit more traditional and just stick with my yellow star. So I'm going to have the new Gamboge for the center and the Cad Yellow for the edges. I'm actually going to go between Cad Yellow and the new Gamboge. It's a subtle difference, but it will make a difference in kind of how this looks. So I'm really happy with that. Oh, I need to do my little planter at the bottom. In this case, I think I'm going to go all in with some of the green and red. It's very Christmas themed, and because we do have the green and red in the background, this will suit that just fine. And these ones I'm going a little bit lighter and a little bit thinner than I did with the bulbs. And I could probably move down a size actually for this step. I find that having a larger brush gives you a little bit better blend, but the smaller brush will often give you a little bit more control. So as you get better at watercolor painting, that's something that you can work on, is trying to move up your brush sizes so you just get the slightly better mix. But as a beginner, I would say just make sure that you take your time and use a small brush. I'm going to add some crimson just to the edges here, and you want to make sure that your green is dry before you do this. You'll find that if you are not super practiced, if any of the watercolor paint touches, what you're going to run into is it's going to bleed into each other. Sometimes you just want to let things dry just so you end up with a really good final result. So I've pulled up my art journaling page here, and now that this is fully dry, I've now added my focal images. It works. It's a little bit of a mixed style because this is very vintagey and this is not nearly as vintagey, but that's okay. I'm actually okay with it being a little bit different from each other. I'm thinking maybe what I might want to do is just add a little bit of white gesso in a couple spots. I'm thinking that might just add a little bit of continuity. I'm going to give this a try and see. So I feel like the area behind here is a little dark. it's having a hard time kind of sticking out from the surface. And I'm just taking kind of a partially damp baby wipe, adding some color, pulling it back, adding a bit of color, pulling it back, and then even taking what I have on my baby wipe and just wiping it up. Maybe just even putting some lines across here, because I feel like once you put the tree down, it becomes a little bit like it's floating in the sky. So mark making to the rescue, as always, by adding a little bit of mark making and things. You can basically suggest things that should be there. I think that helps a little bit, actually. That allows us to maybe pop a little bit from the background. Makes it feel like it's a little bit better suited for where it's sitting. So now I've added on my images again, and I think that helps, the white helps it a little bit, just to help stick out from the background a little bit and not get quite as lost. The intention with this whole page was to try to add some more modern elements to something that had a little bit more photo-based paper images and just try to kind of help it mix together. I've been playing a little bit more with vintage as well, and so maybe this wasn't totally the perfect imagery for it, but I really wanted to try to mix imagery and kind of see what I could kind of come up with. I'm going to try adding my sediment. We'll see if this works. I'm going to be stamping on a very uneven surface, so I may just use this as a guide to be able to add in more lettering as I go. Well, that's actually working really well. I was not expecting that to work nearly as well. So hey, it's a good stamping day. And I'm using the words Peaceful Christmas, and I think for me, as Christmas is coming very soon, I was thinking about the idea of intention for the holiday seasons. For some of us, things are still closed because of pandemic. For others of us, it's pretty much Christmas as normal. I know in my city there's still a lot of restrictions, and we'll kind of see what this ends up being. But I really wanted to focus on the idea of the simple Christmas, having a very peaceful, relaxing time, and to connect and rest and be able just to have time just to be. I've gone through quite a bit of transition this month, so with that, I'm really hoping that I can have some time just to rest, to kind of go through what I've experienced and learn from it. And I just realized that my peaceful isn't far enough over, so I'm going to put peace filled. That is my solution to that. You know, sometimes we make mistakes or we don't think it through. I generally try to stamp from right to left instead of the other way around, just so that I don't run into these issues. And these areas that didn't stamp perfectly, I'm just filling them with a paint pen. And I hope that we all take some time over this holiday season just to find rest and a little bit of peace. I know it can be just so much going on, and I know even with the pandemic and talking to certain people and everything, it's not easy where things are at. It's still very complex, and there's a lot of different feelings about things, and I've really tried to stay out of the whole pandemic and COVID conversation, and I've been more focused on how can I find peace in the season? How can I find hope in the season? And just try to really focus on the good and focus on the things that I can control. And I can't control so much of what's going on, but I really want to be intentional this Christmas. Instead of thinking about the things that are not going well, think about the things that I can control and how I can find peace and joy in this season, and just be thankful for everything I've been given and everything that I have. And I think I'm just going to actually handwrite Christmas on there. I'm going to be using sukwing tape to add my images onto my paper. And part of that is because it is very strong, and we've added a bunch of gel and other mediums. I often find the Wild Whisper embellishments don't always take tape super well, and I'm not too sure why that is, but I think maybe it's the slick surface. Sometimes I find it's hard to get it to stick, so using sukwing tape seems to solve that problem. So since my letters were not completely straight, I don't know if I really got my Christmas all that straight either, but that's okay. That's part of the handmade feel of journals, is that they don't always have to be perfect. They don't always have to be perfectly centered. A lot of it is kind of that personal preference. So when I added the paint onto the letters, I decided to do the entire letters. That way it looks very even instead of having some stuff looking really dark black and some looking more shiny black. I wanted to have a really consistent feel to it. And I recently found these Pen Touch gold pens, and it's a very shiny gold. What I really like about this one is I really like the color of the gold in it, and it worked quite well on the surface. And so I was just writing down some of the things that I want out of Christmas, like time to paint. I've been wanting to work on my canvas paintings for quite a while, and I need to pull out my easel and do another painting. I want to have time for music, time for my husband, time to breathe, time to do some yoga, time to do whatever I want to do. If that means I spend all day watching movies, I want time for that. And just the idea of a break, a rest, some quiet. And I'm really looking forward to hopefully having that during this Christmas break. I am trying to get ahead in my posting schedule so that I'm able to do that and still be able to connect with you guys again in the coming year. So I hope you learned a few new ways you can use collage in your art journal pages from this video. I hope you found this video useful, and if you have, if you could like it, subscribe to my channel, and hit that notification button so you don't miss on any future videos. And I just want to say thank you for your support. Every like and every subscription does mean a lot to me. If you're interested in seeing the supply list for this video, you can see it below. You can also view it on my website, hopalongstudio.com. There I also include photos and written directions for each of these videos. And I do hope you take some time for some personal self-care and some creative time over this holiday season. I will see you next time. Bye for now.